During the latter half of the 1800s through 1904, as the Church came under increasing pressure from the U.S. federal government for the practice of plural marriage, senior church leaders often responded to what they viewed as immoral incursions on members' constitutional rights by blatantly lying about the Church's polygamous intent and practices. For all intents and purposes, when it came to protecting, preserving, and promoting plural marriage, polygamy killed honesty among members of the Church. Lying and deception in service of plural marriage became, at times, the expected moral standard for Mormons. In an ironic inversion of the Lord's declaration that the truth will make us free, Mormons embraced the opposite ethic, that lying about polygamy was acceptable to allow members to freely practice plural marriage. A good example of this is Apostle and later church president Joseph F. Smith. When it came to protecting plural marriage, Joseph F. Smith lied to everybody. I put an asterisk next to the word everybody because, practically speaking, it's impossible to lie to everybody, but Joseph F. Smith came close. To be specific, he lied to the U.S. Senate, the public, members of the church, and other church leaders in the service of plural marriage. If somebody lies once or from time to time, we might not consider him a liar, but someone who consistently lies over and over is justifiably identified as a liar. When it came to protecting plural marriage, Apostle and eventual church president Joseph F. Smith was a liar, and he was the one that collected many of the affidavits used to accuse the prophet Joseph of involvement in plural marriage. Let's start with an introduction to Joseph F. Smith's life to better understand who he was, with young Joseph F. on the left and the older Joseph F. we're more visually familiar with on the right. Joseph F. Smith was the son of Hiram Smith and was named after his uncle, the prophet Joseph. The F in his name stands for Fielding, his mother Mary Fielding's maiden name. When Joseph F. was 5 years old, his father Hiram was murdered. When Joseph F. was 7, his mother became the 20th plural wife of Heber C. Kimball. When Joseph F. was 13, his mother passed away. When he was about 14, he physically assaulted the schoolmaster and was kicked out of school. Of this time in his life, Joseph F. explained, quote, "It was in 1852 that my blessed mother passed away, leaving me fatherless and motherless, but not altogether friendless at the early age of 13 years. After my mother's death, there followed 18 months, from September 21st, 1852 to April 1854, of perilous times for me. I was almost like a comet or fiery meteor, without attraction or gravitation to keep me balanced or guide me within reasonable bounds." At the age of 15, Brigham called Joseph F. on a mission to Hawaii, which helped him straighten his life out. This picture was taken in Copenhagen, Denmark, when Apostle Joseph F. Smith was 35 years old. At the age of 20, Joseph F. marries his 16-year-old cousin, Elvira Clark. At the age of 27, Brigham Young directs Joseph F. to take another wife, which he does by marrying Julina Lamson. Less than 2 months later, Brigham ordains Joseph F. an apostle. At the age of 29, Joseph F. takes another wife, 17-year-old Sarah Richards, and his first wife, Elvira, divorces him in California on the grounds of, quote, adulterous intercourse with what she termed his concubines, Julina Lamson and Sarah Richards. A history professor at BYU described Joseph F. Smith as being, quote, capable of intense anger, particularly when he confronted opposition to the practice of polygamy. To his wife, Sarah Richards, in 1885, Joseph F. wrote, quote, "If they call on you, my darling, to go before the Grand Inquisition or court, I want you, and I mean it to tell the goddamn fiends that you are my wife now and forever, and they may help themselves," end quote. Joseph F. was the second counselor in the first presidency to President John Taylor. This picture was taken around 1880. Joseph F., on the far right, was the second counselor to President Wilford Woodruff. This picture was taken in 1893. And Joseph F. Smith, once again on the right, was the first counselor to President Lorenzo Snow. This picture was taken between 1898 and 1901. Joseph F. Smith was the president of the church from 1901 until 1918, when he died in the Spanish flu epidemic. In October General Conference in 1890, in response to government allegations that the church was still performing plural marriages, President Wilford Woodruff declared that, quote, "We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice." This excerpt is from the document commonly referred to as the Manifesto, which was accepted by the church in that General Conference as authoritative and binding. And yet, in the Church's Gospel Topics essay on the Manifesto and the End of Plural Marriage, footnote 36, the Church admits that 8 apostles took plural wives between 1890 and 1904. The apostles' actions after 1890 turned President Woodruff's declaration in the Manifesto into a lie. President Joseph F. Smith's testimony to the United States Senate in 1904 made it clear that lying to protect polygamy had continued the entire time. Upon being questioned several times in the U.S. Senate about whether there had been any plural marriages after the 1890 Manifesto, Joseph F. Smith testified, quote, "I know of no marriages occurring after the final decision of the Supreme Court of the United States, which happened in 1879 in Reynolds versus the United States, when the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that a federal law prohibiting polygamy did not violate the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment," continuing with a quote, "On that question, and from that time till today, there has never been, to my knowledge, a plural marriage performed in accordance with the understanding, instruction, connivance, counsel, or permission of the presiding authorities of the Church, or of the Church in any shape or form," end quote. And when asked if he had performed or knew of any post-manifesto plural marriages, Mr. Smith, "No, sir, I never have." The chairman, "Either in Mexico," or Mr. Smith, "Nowhere on earth, sir." The chairman, "Do you know of any such?" Mr. Smith, "No, sir, I do not." He also testified that he had never heard an apostle publicly advocate or defend plural marriage since the Manifesto. President Joseph F. Smith definitively claimed in his 1904 Senate testimony that he did not know of any plural marriages performed anywhere on earth between 1890 and 1904. Let's consider the following evidence from other apostles and their wives that Joseph F. Smith was lying. In 1892, the first counselor in the First Presidency, George Q. Cannon, wrote a letter on First Presidency stationery authorizing a plural marriage in Mexico for a U.S. resident, which implied Joseph Fielding Smith's approval. As Cannon wrote, the new polygamous union was, quote, "satisfactory to all of us." 2 years later, in 1894, Apostle Abraham H. Cannon, son of first counselor in the First Presidency, George Q. Cannon, who had been called to be an apostle when he was 30 years old, recorded approval for his plan to take a post-manifesto plural wife when he recorded in his diary on October 24, 1894, quote, "Presidents Woodruff and Smith both said they were willing for such a ceremony to occur if done in Mexico." The young Apostle Cannon married his 4th wife in 1896 and later that year died at the age of 37 from an infection caused by ocean water trapped in his inner ear. In 1898, as second counselor in the First Presidency, Joseph F. Smith knew that George Q. Cannon, President Woodruff's first counselor in the First Presidency, had authorized Apostle Matthias Cowley to perform plural marriages in the United States. In the minutes of a meeting of the Quorum of the Twelve in 1911, former Apostle Cowley explained, quote, "Brother Joseph F. Smith told me on 2 occasions that Brother Cannon had the authority and Brother Woodruff didn't want to be known in it." At the turn of the century, when President Lorenzo Snow refused to allow the performance of polygamous marriages in Mexico, Joseph F. Smith went around him and established a permanent avenue for those ordinances in the colonies without the knowledge or authorization of President Lorenzo Snow. After Alexander F. McDonald, the Juarez Stake Patriarch, failed in August of 1900 to get permission to perform a requested plural marriage, Patriarch McDonald conferred with First Presidency Second Counselor Joseph F. Smith during conference of October 1900 and apparently obtained verbal permission because McDonald performed the plural marriage that had previously been denied later that month in a different colony, Colonia Garcia, in Mexico. Also in October 1900, Counselor Joseph F. Smith returned a written request for permission for plural marriage in a letter advising McDonald that he wanted to meet with him privately to discuss the matter when he and Apostle Owen Woodruff visited the Mexican colonies in November of 1900. In that month, McDonald began performing polygamous marriages for scores of Juarez Stake residents who requested the privilege. When McDonald's son-in-law, Orson Pratt Brown, presented the records of those ceremonies to President Joseph F. Smith 12 years later, the church president said, "Brother Brown, all of this work that Brother McDonald performed was duly authorized by me." And on the manila envelope in which he placed these polygamous marriages, he wrote, "Received December 3, 1912, JFS Records of Marriages from O.P. Brown, Records of A.F. McDonald." Joseph F. Smith took Apostle Owen Woodruff, the son of former church president Wilford Woodruff, who had been made an apostle at the age of 24, into his confidence about these arrangements. The younger general authority not only referred Mormon colonists to MacDonald for plural marriages during their visit, but also prophesied in the name of Jesus Christ in the Juarez State Conference in 1900 that no year would ever pass without children being born into polygamy. After making that prophecy, Apostle Woodruff turned toward First Presidency Counselor Joseph F. Smith and said, quote, "Now if I'm wrong, there sits the man that can set me right." Joseph F. Smith did not correct him. The minutes for this conference are not included in the typed minutes of the Juarez Stake. Less than 4 years later, the youthful Apostle Woodruff would pass away at the age of 31 after contracting smallpox while visiting his second wife in the Mormon colonies in Mexico. Apostle John W. Taylor's plural wife claimed that when Taylor married 2 plural wives in August 1901, while Joseph F. Smith was the only counselor in the First Presidency, when Taylor requested permission in the Salt Lake Temple, Joseph F. Smith, quote, replied in parables, gave consent, but patted him on the shoulder and said, "Be careful, John." During October 1901 conference, in which Joseph F. Smith was sustained as president of the church, Apostle Matthias Cowley performed a plural marriage ceremony for California Mission President Joseph E. Robinson in Salt Lake City according to arrangements made by Joseph F. Smith. From then until 1918, President Joseph F. Smith provided Robinson with an additional allowance of $1,800 yearly for the support of his post-manifesto plural wives. That's the equivalent of $65,000 a year in 2022 dollars. The next month, in November 1901, President Smith authorized another plural marriage. President Smith's first cousin, once removed, John F. Burton, appealed to him for permission to marry a plural wife due to his first wife's childlessness. The president agreed and sent him to Apostle Cowley, who performed the ceremony in Salt Lake City in November 1901. Matthias Cowley explained that, quote, Burton, a relative of President Joseph F. Smith, came to me from him. In March 1902, President Smith's second cousin in the First Presidency, Anton H. Lund, overheard President Smith in the First Presidency office tell a man who was unhappily married, quote, "You can go to Mexico and marry a bride there." In a fascinating act of obfuscation, on March 11, 1902, President Anton H. Lund recorded in his diary President Smith's counsel to the troubled priesthood holder to address his unhappy marriage by marrying polygamously in Mexico in Latin. Io dicit potesne ire Mexico et ube nubem nubere. These examples of Joseph F. Smith's clear involvement in plural marriages after the 1890 Manifesto in 1892, 1894, 1898, 1900, 1901, and 1902 are by no means the only evidence of his complicity in and awareness of plural marriages, but they seem sufficient to make the point that he was absolutely involved. This matters because it makes clear his testimony to the United States Senate was entirely dishonest. Quote, when asked in 1904 if he had performed or knew of any post-manifesto plural marriages, President Smith testified that, quote, I know of no marriages occurring. From that time till today, there has never been, to my knowledge, a plural marriage performed in accordance with the understanding, instruction, connivance, counsel, or permission of the presiding authorities of the church or of the church in any shape or form. Church President Joseph F. Smith was a liar. This type of dishonesty was manifested by more than just Joseph F. Smith. In between the first and second manifestos, members of the First Presidency, individually or as a unit, published at least 24 denials that any new plural marriages were being performed. These also were lies. Here are more than 20 examples of denials between 1890 and 1904 that the Church was continuing to practice plural marriage after the Manifesto. Most of them occurred in church publications. Let's look at one to get a sense for what kind of things they said. This example is from February 1903. The president of the church at the time was Joseph F. Smith. LDS Apostle and Senator-elect from Utah, Reed Smoot, was charged with polygamy. In response, quote, President Joseph F. Smith, when interviewed by the Deseret News concerning the foregoing Associated Press dispatch, said, quote, no plural or polygamous marriages have been solemnized by sanction of the church for many years. As we've seen, this wasn't true. Recall that less than a year before, President Joseph F. Smith had told the unhappily married priesthood holder that he could go to Mexico to take another wife there. The next year, President Joseph F. Smith's statement to the church in General Conference on April 6, 1904, perpetuated and reinforced the same lies directly to members of the church. It read, "Inasmuch as there are numerous reports in circulation that plural marriages have been entered into contrary to the official declaration of President Woodruff of September 26, 1890, commonly called the Manifesto, which was issued by President Woodruff and adopted by the Church at its General Conference, October 6, 1890, which forbade any marriage violative of the law of the land. I, Joseph F. Smith, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, hereby affirm and declare that no such marriages have been solemnized with the sanctioned consent or knowledge of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." This claim, directed specifically at members of the church but intended for non-members too, was simply another lie from President Joseph F. Smith. Given Joseph F. Smith's proven willingness to lie profusely to preserve, protect, and promote polygamy, it's not hard to imagine him pressuring members of the church to attest to whatever the church needed them to when it came to the creation of the affidavits collected to implicate Joseph Smith in polygamous relationships. The church's claims regarding polygamy are dependent upon affidavits created by women who, decades after Joseph's death, claimed to be his plural wives. Many of those affidavits were collected by Joseph F. Smith and are available in what is referred to as the Joseph F. Smith Affidavit Book in the Church History Library. Once again, given Joseph F. Smith's proven willingness to lie profusely to preserve, protect, and promote polygamy, it's not hard to imagine him pressuring members of the church to attest to whatever the church needed them to. The ambiguous married or sealed verbiage used in many of the affidavits was enough to obfuscate what really happened between Joseph and those women. And for Joseph F. Smith, the end clearly justified the means. After President Joseph F. Smith's testimony in Washington, D.C. in 1904, he faced mounting pressure to force apostles John W. Taylor and Matthias Calley, who had been involved in many post-manifesto plural marriages, to testify before the Senate. President Joseph F. Smith sent each apostle 2 contradictory letters and asked them to sign and return both. One letter stated they would testify, the other said that they would not. A plural wife of John W. Taylor later provided the background to the letters her husband and Apostle Calley sent to Joseph F. Smith after refusing to testify before the Senate committee. Regarding John W. Taylor, quote, "He received 2 contradictory letters in the mail for him to sign and return. One said he would go to Washington, the other said he would not go to Washington. Nellie, John W. Taylor's wife, cried, 'John, you don't intend to place yourself in a trap by signing both those letters, do you?' He pointed at the signature of President Joseph F. Smith and said, 'I will do what my prophet orders me to do.' If apostles were willing to lie because their church leader Joseph F. Smith asked them to, would you expect members to have reacted differently? Eventually, apostles Taylor and Calley were asked to sign their own resignation letters from the Quorum of the 12 for the church to use if needed. When Anthony W. Ivins learned about the resignations signed in October 1905, he wrote his cousin Heber J. Grant, quote, 'It might be all right if we were going to deceive anyone except ourselves. We will be the only ones fooled.' After Anthony W. Ivins became an apostle, his daughter Florence described how, following a meeting he attended with fellow apostles in the First Presidency, her father seemed upset. When Florence asked her mother what the matter was, Sister Ivins confided to her that during the meeting, President Smith had said he would lie any day to save his brother. Elder Ivins served as a general authority as both an apostle and a member of the First Presidency from 1907 to 1934. President Smith refers to Joseph F. Smith, church president from 1901 to 1918. This picture of Apostle Anthony W. Ivins was taken in 1921 when Elder Ivins was in his late 60s. Former LDS Apostle Matthias F. Calley claimed that, quote, "We have always been taught that when the brethren were in a tight place that it would not be amiss to lie to help them out. One of the presidency of the church made this statement some years ago when I was in the presidency of one of the stakes of Zion in Idaho, that he would lie like hell to help his brethren. And lie like hell is what they appear to have done." To be fair, Joseph F. Smith's lies don't prove he understood that it was Brigham and not his uncle, the prophet Joseph, that introduced polygamy into the church. I assume that Joseph F. Smith believed Brigham's narrative, and that Apostle Smith's lies were intended to promote the truth as he understood it. What is clear, though, is that because Joseph F. Smith was so consistently willing to lie for polygamy, his claims, as well as the claims of those influenced by him, shouldn't reasonably be taken at face value.